Hello, I'm Mark Jones and I live here at Trefnant Hall farm where I farm in partnership with my parents, Jane and David Jones. Trefnant is a 500-acre tenanted farm on the Powys estate. We've got 300 acres here at Trefnant itself, and a mile down the road we've got another 200 at Newhouse Farm. Stocking on the farm, we've got 350 Angus dairy crosses, and we take them all the way through to finish at 24 months of age, so we'll have around 700 in total on the farm at any one point. We also have around 600 sheep in total, with about 130 ewe lambs included in that. On the farm here at Trefnant, our main issue throughout the year is the weather, and particularly the droughts during 2018 and also during 2019. We found that the weather over the last few years has really dictated what we're planning to do on the farm. In 2018 we only grew about 6 tonne of dry matter, and then in 2019 we actually got it back up to about 12 to 13 tonne of dry matter before it tailed off again last year at about 8.5 to 9 tonne of dry matter due to the dry conditions during the summer period. So our priority here at Trefnant is really to manage that dry period. We're slowly turning to more herbal lays, a lot of plantain, chicory and cocksfoot. We're also trying to maintain much higher covers of grass through the summer season than what you'd expect. And again, we're very dependent on carrying that higher cover, and we'll decide usually in late May and June whether we need to strip graze it with cattle or try and take some silage. But that is the main kind of challenge we have here at Trefnant.
The whole farm at Trefnant is actually in the Grass Check GB project. We normally take weekly plate meter readings during the grazing season, and we also take grass samples once a fortnight. We found that it's been very beneficial just to calculate exactly how much grass we're growing, and we use the AgriNet software to really work out when we've got a surplus and when we can take out silage, or when we've got a deficit and we need to feed some concentrates or feed more silage throughout. The other key part of it is that we've also got a weather station, and this has really helped us to manage our situation here at Trefnant. We also get comparisons across the other farms across the UK, the other 50 farms, and basically it's allowed us to realise that we are a very dry farm during certain periods of the year, and I suppose it's just helped us make certain decisions to manage the situation a little better in those terms. The farm is actually in Glassland Advanced, and we're now in our 4th year of a 5-year agreement. During that period, we've created on-farm orchards. We've also created streamside corridors. We've also double fenced and put in new hedgerows, and we've achieved about 500 metres per year. As well as that, we've also got a couple of small hay meadows. We've got some low input grassland, and we've also fenced grazed woodland to allow it to become ungrazed. Of the back of that scheme, we've seen that quite a lot of the wildlife has also improved on the farm. We've seen the return of hares, particularly on some of the rotational grazing, and we've also seen the introduction of red kites across the farm as well.
I'm just going to talk to you about fodder beet in our system here at Trefnant. So we're aiming to grow about 60 acres in total. 10 acres of that will be for sheep during the winter time, and the remaining 50 will be for around 300 to 350 cattle during the winter. We're aiming to get the sheep on the fodder beet from mid-Christmas through to early March, and with the cattle they'll go on from the 1st of November through to probably the end of March. What we're aiming for here is to have a yield of about 20 tonnes of dry matter. We find that it's a very consistent crop here at Trefnant on such a dry farm. So we will normally get a minimum of 15 tonne of dry matter and a max of about 25, even in our driest years. The huge advantage we have here, because we're on shaly, dry soils, we can outwinter the cattle and the sheep, and we can do it for approximately 50% of the cost of being housed during the winter time. So that's equivalent of about 60 to 70 pence per head, compared to £1.20 to £1.40 for housing the cattle. For the sheep, again, it provides a very high energy diet, and then we're aiming then to get the sheep onto grass 3 to 4 weeks before lambing outside from the 1st of April. And again, very high energy, but there's that lack of protein in fodder beet nearer to lambing, so we're aiming to move them off onto grass. With the cattle, we're aiming for about 0.7 of a kilo growth on average throughout the winter period. And then after that point, the cattle normally have a little bit of extra growth during the spring, and we'll normally average about 1.4 kilos a day all the way through to slaughter. We aim to keep the cattle on there for the full 5 months, because in the past we've had some really bad marches, and then we're having to, we've got no option really for those cattle to go and be housed at that point. So it's a safer bet for us to keep those cattle on the fodder beet for that little bit longer, to allow the grass to get ahead of them, and then we can do a very quick round in March and April until grass is then growing flat out for us.
Fodder beet does provide the majority of winter forage for both the sheep and the cattle. However, we still need some quality silage to be made. So normally we're aiming for around 450 good quality round bales to go on the fodder beet, so the cattle will have about 3 bales a day. We're also aiming to have an extra 200 bales for buffer feeding during the spring and during the autumn, and also through the summer months. And finally, we normally aim for around 40 to 50 acres of very high quality grass silage to be clamped, and this is to be fed to calves from January through to March.
So this is some of our traditional grass, ryegrass and white clover lays. So the whole farm was originally in this type of lay, but due to the dry conditions in the last 3 or 4 years, we're actually starting to move away from this kind of lay. So what you'll see in front of you is what we're going to take for some high quality grass silage for our young stock, particularly for the calves. So once they get to 100 kilos, we're aiming to wean them off concentrates and get them onto this very high quality silage, which should be cut at about 5 weeks of age. And what we're aiming for is an ME of about 11.5 to 12 ME and a crude protein of 15% plus. And then we should be able to get those cattle down to maybe a kilo of rolled barley and ad-lib silage before we look to turn them outside at grass.
These are some of the south-facing slopes at Trefnant, and as you can see, they've burnt off very quickly. This would have been August last year, so we had 2 very significant dry periods, the first being in April and May and heading into June, and then the second was in early to late August. So the priority for our farm is, because we're on such light soils with shale underlying, that we need to try and buffer or make the farm a little bit more resilient. So hence the change in grass lays to more herbal content and more cocksfoot.
So this is some of the reseeding we do after fodder beet. What we aim to do is double crop the fodder beet, and then we'll do probably half of the reseeding of the fodder beet area. So we'll do about 30 acres of reseeds, and 30 acres will go back into fodder beet. And what we've started to do now, we've started to switch over to Italians and hybrid ryegrass with red clover, aiming for a 2 to 3 year lay initially. So we've decided to do that just because we've been having such dry summers and springs. So we're wanting a crop which gets away very quickly, so we can get some silage as quickly as possible. We're also thinking with that extra red clover in there, there'll be a little bit more drought resistance and hopefully a little bit more quality. So this 30 acres should be cut twice, if not 3 times. Well, obviously 3 times in the second season,
and maybe twice in the first season, with some of the aftermaths being used for lamb or cattle finishing. But again, the priority for us is to get good quality silage and bulkier crop, just so we've got something nice and early before we go too dry. And then the plan will be then is to stitch directly in a herbal lay after this point, maybe 3/4 of the way through the second season, or if it's lasted into the third season, maybe the third season, to give it a little bit of shade and help. And then we've still got a little bit of Italian ryegrass and red clover floating around, just to graze it or to silage if need be. So now we've moved on to one of our herbal lays. So the farm's probably got about 100 acres of this type of lay in the system. So we've got a little bit of plantain, chicory, timothy, cocksfoot, ryegrass. We've got white clover and some bird's foot trefoil in here as well. And really all we're aiming for on many of these steeper banks south facing here at Trefnant is just to provide something which will maintain a little bit of quality during those summer months when it's very dry, but also just to keep on growing. So we found that with the ryegrass, it's really struggled. It's burnt off completely, and then also it heads as soon as it gets stressed in that drought period, and we lose the quality of the grass. So by changing some of the species and the mix here, we're aiming just to allow us to grow grass during those very dry periods, and that stock do exceptionally well off it. So the cattle are doing about 1.4 kilos a day off this kind of mix. But again, there's plenty of clover in here, and the aim is to reduce the level of nitrogen input to it in the future. Again, you can see the clumps of cocksfoot where the cattle have rejected it around certain patches around the field. But again, the other thing we're aiming to do is really looking to really increase the grass covers through the summer months. So we'll go into covers of 3,500 to 4,000 kilos to maintain that cover and maintain that moisture throughout the season. And really our priority is just about keeping grass growing in those dry periods. Fodder beet is a big part of the sheep enterprise. We aim to keep sheep on the fodder beet from around mid-December through to the first week in March. The main priority here is just to rest the grass ready for spring utilisation. The crop is very high in energy but low in protein, so we aim to move the sheep off the fodder beet about 3 to 4 weeks before lambing time, and rotate them round most of our steep ground before being set stocked later in the season. Normally costs about £4 to £5 per ewe during that winter period. Again, we try and provide a run back in wet conditions, and then we also supplement with very good high quality silage as well. After being rotated around the steeper parts of the farm, the sheep are set stocked in late March, about a week before for the lambing, which is going to be the 1st of April. And then these are the twins, and as you can see, they're set stocked at about 2,000 kilos of dry matter per hectare, where the grass has been rested since the middle of November. The sheep will receive no concentrates at lambing time at all, and we also keep the twins and triplets all together. The ewes, especially the twins, are set stocked at 5 an acre, and this is what we're aiming for. 2 nice big healthy lambs with no issues. All we do is put a rubber ring on them when they're born, and I just mark them so I know that they're together. I'll go around 6 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock in the evening, and that would be it in terms of our lambing round. It's a similar principle for the singles, but as you can see, we reduce the covers off completely. So usually the twins have grazed this ground in front of the singles, and then we'll set stock the singles at about 15 to 20 an acre, with the aim of trying to reduce lamb size slightly. Then hopefully we don't have any lambing difficulties with the singles. In late April, after the majority of lambing has taken place, the ewes are pushed off the silage fields and are moved back up onto the steep ground to continue with the rotational grazing. We aim to finish the majority of lambs after weaning, and quite often they'll be finished on some of the herbal lays. The lambs generally get the priority grazing and will travel around the farm in front of the cattle, with the cattle just clearing up the swards after them, just aiming to try and maximise growth rates from the herbal lays. All the lambs are on a cost reduction contract sold directly to KPAC under a Tesco scheme. So we know exactly what the price is in January before the lambing season starts. We're aiming to achieve about 19 kilos dead weight. And again, the majority of the lambs will go off the farm in August, September and October. This last year we averaged just under £90 per lamb. The farm was carbon footprinted by Bangor University on behalf of Hubby Keep Cymru, and this was really for some of their marketing material for the Welsh way, to try and show how sustainable Welsh lamb was. So basically, our farm produced around 7.92 kilos of CO2 equivalent compared to the average of about 10.08. So these are some of the Aberdeen Angus heifers and steer calves that we aim to buy each year. Normally we would aim to buy 300 to 350 Aberdeen Angus heifers. We aim to buy Angus because of the premium. Really we're on a Tesco's contract, so we can get about 30 pence per kilo premium at the top end, which is a massive difference for this business. We're also aiming to buy heifers rather than steers because they're £80 to £100 cheaper at the start, and really what we're aiming to do is get a carcass of about 300 kilos, which generally these will manage quite easily. So I think we averaged over £1,100 last year for about a 300 kilo carcass, or thereabout. So what we do when these calves come in, they're all autumn born. We buy them mid-October at about 55 to 60 kilos. And then really our target is to get them in as quickly as possible to reduce any disease spread. So we normally use firms like Butalar and Meadow Quality and buy them directly off those. The calves will receive pneumonia vaccines, and then we'll keep them on milk for about 5 weeks before weaning them and getting them on concentrates as quickly as possible. After that stage, we keep them ad lib on concentrates and straw until they get to about 100 kilos, and then we start introducing very good quality clamp silage. And then our aim then is to transfer them off 18% down to a 16% nut, and then over to rolled barley as they're eating more and more silage. So by the time we get down to the middle of March, on around turnout, or a little bit later, we're aiming for these to be at about 180 kilos at turnout. Generally, they've done about 0.8 to 0.9 of a kilo through that time. There's no point us pushing them any harder because they'll just sink when they go out to grass. So we keep them ticking over, and then we'll give them some rolled barley at grass for about a 3-week period, really aiming to transition them to grass. So we might start off with 1.5 kilos to 1 kilo of rolled barley, and then just drop it down over that 3-week period. And then if everything is going well, these cattle won't receive any more concentrates until they're killed. This is our cattle handling here at Trefnant. We were lucky that 3 years ago we'd spent the full farm business grant on a squeeze crush with weigh cells. We've got an automatic sorter at the front, which is done by an airline. And then what we've also got here are, is a race which squeezes in for the calves when they're at the smallest, and it also moves out for some of the biggest cattle. So just enables us to probably weigh about 100 an hour, and really due to that, it just means we're a lot more efficient. All the cattle have got EID tags. We put them in as soon as they arrive on farm, so we've got growth rates of the cattle all the way through. Particularly useful when the cattle are young, So once they're weaned and we've started putting them on silage, if any of the cattle are struggling, we'll lift the concentrate supplement upwards. And as they get older, we reduce it down, and those monthly weigh-ins really help. So again, just gives us an idea of if there's any worm burden as well out at grass, or if there's any other issues with grass quality. But all of these extra bits of data and figures just help us to run the business a lot more efficient. Here the cattle are starting to get transitioned over to fodder beet. What we tend to do is sprinkle out a little bit of fodder beet out at grass for about a week. During the first few days we'll actually run it over with the tractor just to split it up and allow them to start to like it and eat it. And then 2 or 3 days after that we'll just put out full fodder beet and get them used to eating it fully. And then we spend a further 2 weeks then transitioning them directly on the crop, and we'll move them on and off and just start to increase their allocation from 1 kilo of dry matter per day up to their full allocation over that period. So there's no problem with acidosis. Here we have all of the yearling cattle which have now been fully transitioned onto the fodder beet, and now this is their first day on their full allocation. At the top of the field you can see round bales spread out on the flat bit of the field. They'll be allocated about 2 kilos of dry matter in total, and then the cattle then try to be pushed to ad lib, aiming for around 8 to 10 kilos of dry matter of fodder beet as well. The cattle move directly off the fodder beet crop at about 450 kilos. During this stage, they don't need any transition back to grass, and they normally perform very well with compensatory growth occurring. Normally we'd expect the cattle to be doing about 1.4 kilos a day at grass during the early spring. The cattle are all grazed throughout the summer months on high quality grass lays, whether that be your traditional grass clover mix or rather a more herbal lay, and some grasses with a little bit more coxsfoot in. The cattle will generally keep at about that 1.4 kilos a day throughout, as long as we can keep enough pasture or grass in front of them. We aim for a 300 kilo carcass, and the majority of the cattle is sold between June and the end of October. We're aiming for a target weight of 300 kilos dead, and at the moment the majority of the cattle are going to foils in Melton Mowbray on the Tesco's Angus Premium scheme, where the cattle will receive around 30 pence per kilo premium. The cattle generally grade O plus and 3 and 4L. There is no requirement at all to feed any of the heifers out at grass. They're all finished without. So generally the only supplement they receive will be as calves, and during that initial transition to grass at 3 months of age. The beef carbon footprint also came out lower than average, with a net CO2 emissions per kilo of 9.69 compared to an average of 14.05.